Inna Shevchenko is the leader of the international women's movement FEMEN, a writer, a speaker, and a fearless free speech advocate. Inna, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for long, I should say.
Well, I'm really glad that we connected. I've known about your work for a while, and then I saw a piece that you wrote in the International Business Times last week about the regressive left and the racist right, and that basically most of us are in between, and that's very much what we've been talking about here on this show, so I thought it would be a perfect time to talk to you. So you're in Austria right now, is that right?
I'm right now in Austria, yes, for a conference.
Can I ask what you're doing there, or is this a top secret mission?
Yeah, no, it's I'm here for a conference about free speech, of course. I hope that this time it will not be interrupted by a terrorist. We will be speaking and enjoy this topic, discussing this topic.
All right, well, we're going to talk about some of the interruptions that you've had by terrorists when you're giving talks on free speech. But first, let's do a little bit on your biography, because I think it's pretty amazing. I mentioned at the top of the show, you were born in Ukraine, not the Ukraine. You were born in Ukraine the same year that the Soviet Union fell. And I think that had a lot to do with sort of your path right now because of things that you saw in a sort of newborn country. So can you talk a little bit about your history first?
Well, right. I was born the year my country was born, actually.
Yeah.
And of course, the situation, you know, for me as a child, for me it was just childhood. But for adults, it was, of course, a rough reality. And then later, I understood that I had a rough childhood. However, you know, for me to make a homework under the candles because all electricity in the city was shut. For the sake of economy, you know, we didn't have a national currency, and my parents were receiving salary with sausages or with bread, you know, and yeah, I mean, poverty was poverty, you know, and I think that this is not something special to tell you about, because still until today many people live in poverty, and 25 years after Ukraine, well, actually right now in a similar situation, and you know, already my nephew, small child who is 8 years old, he lives nearly a similar situation and has similar childhood to what I had. So situation is not really changing and progressing, but of course it had a really huge impact on me, and I think on the old generation that was born after collapse of USSR, because we saw that, you know, as adults were saying, our country was ruled by 450 idiots. This is, I'm quoting.
Yeah.
Particularly, yeah, my grandma and my mother, they were calling them, well, all adults were calling politicians always, you know, there was always this clear gap between society and those 450 idiots, again, as they say. There was always a gap between government and actually citizens. And you, as a child, I never could imagine that there could be any connection between those people, between this small group of people that we could call 1% and 99% of population. Mm-hmm. There was always an impression as if we were living in different countries. I saw, of course, you know, I grew up in a very traditional society where a woman has to work and, well, to have job, and also, of course, take care of everything at home. And even though my father was not a particular patriarch, but of course, well, my mother was housewife as well as working full time. And in 90s, during this time of, you know, trying to create a government in the country after collapse of USSR, parents had to work on different jobs, and my mother was working on 3 different jobs, and of course taking care of us at home, which of course gave an impression and kind of, you know, we had a painted picture of what woman is supposed to do and what her mission is and what man is supposed to do. And even in such a hard economically time, my father was of course earning much more and had access to more jobs and had possibility to find different jobs more interesting than my mother.
Women really were doing 2 jobs because they were working and they were taking care of the home and the kids and all that. Yeah.
But I think it's incorrect to speak in the past because, as I already said, it remains, the reality is still exactly the same. And maybe sometimes we have an illusion, it's packed in a different cover, and we can see more women who do not do that. However, still majority of women live that life. And my mother still continues to work at 2 different jobs today. And well, she doesn't have children anymore. We are gone.
Right. So I don't think you think there's anything wrong with that in and of itself. You just sort of want people to acknowledge the role of the woman, right?
What do you mean? I don't think there
well, that they're doing both these things. It's not bad to take care of your kids in and of itself, right?
It's not bad to take care of your kids, but it's bad if you're the only ones who's supposed to take care of your kid.
Right. So the role.
Well, yeah, exactly. That you have to follow the role and you have no choice. And I think there's a lot of things that are wrong in this concept and in this reality, and therefore. We started our movement in Ukraine as a women's movement, feminist movement, even though at the beginning, I should confess, when we started our activity, we didn't really had a clear understanding what feminism was about. Because, for example, to give you an example, I was studying in the best university of Ukraine. I was studying journalism, and in 4 years of my studies, I never had even 1 hour lecture on what feminism is.
Wow.
I didn't even hear the definition of such ideology because that was something which is not close to Eastern European society, again, where women have to be at home and take care of family, but not go in the street and demand their rights. Actually, it's not concerning only women's rights, but generally I grew up in a country where people do not, until 2004, the moment of Orange Revolution, the first revolution that happened in the history of independent Ukraine. Until that moment, people didn't have to protest was an activity of a bad taste, mauvais goût. It was something that you wouldn't do. It was something that you would do only to probably earn money because political parties in Ukraine pay you for standing with their flags in the street and protesting and supporting one or another politician. So when we started our activity, we were, of course, accused for being paid by someone and being political project, or also being named by our parents or relatives who knew that we don't get money for that. We were just simply named either witches or psychologically sick girls.
Right. Okay. So I don't want to jump too far ahead yet. So we're gonna go into all that. But just to sort of wrap up the Ukraine part, because I think a lot, there's so much happening with Ukraine, and as you said, it is a young country. It's only 25 years old in terms of independence. What do you make of what's happening in Ukraine now? Because it sort of seems like the quest for true independence in a way has failed because Russia is back in Ukraine, right? So do you feel like that Ukraine is really an independent state at this point?
Well, Ukraine is an independent state, and I think that nobody should question it. Well, of course, Putin questions
right.
that.
I mean, Russia's questioning it, yeah.
But Ukraine is an independent state, of course, even though our territories were already taken and occupied, like Crimea was recently occupied and Ukraine lost it right now. And still there is the eastern part of Ukraine occupied by Russian military troops. And I will say it bravely. I will claim that they're Russian troops, as it was proven. Well, Ukraine is an independent state, which is definitely at the stage of its development and creation and, choosing the path. While 99% of population today are screaming for Euro integration and for a wish to join European Union, or a dream, because I think it's quite a dream, not a possibility yet. There is still the government, the one that I mentioned, about 450 idiots. They remain those people because, well, I should say that the problem of my country, the country where I was born, because I don't feel like I have a country. I think that the problem of this country is that for 25 years at least, I observe the same faces in the parliament. I hear the same names of politicians. The country is ruled by the same, if you want, mafia, oligarch unions, fractions. And for example, today's President Poroshenko, who is, supposed to be, and he claims to be the one who is for Euro integration. He was a minister of foreign affairs in a cabinet, in a parliament of President Yanukovych, who was recently the dictator against who people went out recently at the square in Maidan in Kiev. So definitely, I should say that this revolution, I think that it's intellectually unfair and wrong to think that after people go out in the street, that revolution is when people go out in the street. Well, no, it's beginning of it. It's beginning of the process, and I think that the process started in 2004, the first Orange Revolution. 10 years after, people again went out in the street because the changes didn't happen. Today, again, many people are deceived because they don't see rapid changes. But I think that it's mistaken and wrong to expect changes right away. And I think that Ukraine will have to have few more revolutions.
Yeah. So speaking of that, do you think, what does the average person in Ukraine feel about how the rest of the world views them now? Because I sense that the people of Ukraine want more help from the West, and that, in America we talk about it. We talked about it for like the 2 weeks that Putin was moving troops in or whatever it was. There was a 2-week window where we talked about it. Now we just completely forget about it. Is there a disappointment on behalf of the people, sort of how the world has reacted to what's happened there?
Well, of course, yes, there is a disappointment because, people know that their government is actually unable to do something, to change something. And since people give, from the square in Maidan, they were giving the messages to the world, of course they do expect from other states, more powerful or so-called democratic, who already reached a certain level, who could help and support, and especially those who supported verbally but do not support practically. Of course, many people are, as I said, deceived and disappointed today, and even some come to the point when they say that with Yanukovych, with the dictator, it was better because at least we had what to eat and his government didn't touch us.
Yeah. So last thought on this, and then we're going to move on to some of the feminism stuff. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, didn't Ukraine have nukes which they gave up as part of that they would get NATO protection once they were an independent nation? And basically that just didn't happen, right? So they sort of gave up their protection, the weapons that would have protected them, and then they get this invasion, or whatever you want to call it, from Russia, and now the other countries right there are doing nothing, we're doing nothing. So it was really like an unfortunate decision, I suppose.
Well, if we will go right now in discussing about decision on NATO, I think it will be too complex discussion.
Okay, fair enough.
More because, there are a lot of sides of this question. But yes, this is what happened, and of course, many people today thinking back and think that what kind of mistakes were done. But at that moment, it seemed to be a very correct decision because nobody could expect that Putin would suddenly decide to occupy the territories and prove the world that he's even bigger dictator than already the world perceived him as.